When Phil Robertson died in May 2025, he left behind a $400 million empire. His family expected the fortune to go to his wife and 4 sons. But when the lawyer opened his final will, the room froze. There was a 5th name on the list. Phyllis, the secret daughter no one knew existed for 40 years. Did Phil leave his legacy to the child he hid from the world? And how did his wife react to this final betrayal? This is a shocking, true story of the Duck Commander's last wish. The end of an era, May 2025. To understand the shock of the will, we must first look at the silence that descended on West Monroe, Louisiana, in the spring of 2025. For months, the family had been quiet. The usually boisterous Robertson clan, known for their podcasts, their TV shows, and their outspoken opinions, had retreated behind the gates of their estate. Rumors had been swirling since late 2024 that Phil was fading. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, a cruel disease for a man who prided himself on his sharp wit and his ability to quote scripture from memory. But the end came faster than anyone expected. On May 25th, 2025, the flag at Duck Commander headquarters was lowered to half-mast. Phil Alexander Robertson was dead at 79. The funeral was not a media circus. It was exactly what Phil would have wanted: private, somber, surrounded by the woods and the river he loved. There were no politicians giving speeches, no Hollywood executives, just the people who knew him when he was poor. His sons, Alan, Jace, Willie, and Jep, carried his casket. His wife, Miss Kay, the woman who had stood by him for nearly 60 years, walked behind them, looking smaller and more fragile than the world had ever seen her. But the real emotional climax didn't happen at the graveside. It happened the next day, in the lawyer's office. The reading of the will is often a formality, but for the Robertsons, it was a final chapter of a story that had been rewriting itself for decades. Everyone knew Phil was wealthy. The Duck Dynasty empire was worth hundreds of millions, but Phil was a man who believed in legacy over currency. He had prepared handwritten letters for each of his children. He left the business to his sons, charging them to guard the tradition and preach the gospel. He left the estate to Kay, the woman who had built it brick by brick alongside him. But then, the lawyer picked up a separate envelope. It was marked with a name that, until just a few years ago, no one in that room knew existed. Phyllis. The room held its breath. This was the moment of truth. Phil had only known her for a fraction of his life. She wasn't part of the struggle. She wasn't part of the business. Would he acknowledge her in his final act on Earth? Or would he leave her out, protecting the perfect family image one last time? The answer to that question lies in the turbulent, violent, and miraculous history of the man they call the Duck Commander. The monster in the swamp. To understand the existence of the secret daughter, you have to travel back to a time before the cameras, before the beards, and before the Jesus. You have to go back to the 1960s, to a honky-tonk bar in Louisiana. The Phil Robertson of that era was not a patriarch. He was, by his own admission, a monster. He wasn't born into money. He was born in Vivian, Louisiana, in 1946, into dirt floor poverty. His family lived in a house without electricity, without a toilet, sometimes without food. They hunted to eat. That poverty forged a hardness in him, a survival instinct that bordered on savagery. He was a gifted athlete, the starting quarterback at Louisiana Tech ahead of future NFL legend Terry Bradshaw. He had a golden ticket out of poverty. The NFL wanted him. The Washington Redskins were calling. But Phil walked away. He famously told recruiters, "I'd rather hunt ducks than have large, violent men stomp me in the dirt." It sounded like a funny, rustic choice, but it was the beginning of a downward spiral. Phil rejected society. He rejected responsibility. He moved into a small, run-down house near the river, and he began to drink, and not just casually. He drank to oblivion. He rented out a bar. He got into fistfights every weekend. He was violent, unpredictable, and cruel. Kay, who had married him at 17, was living in a domestic war zone. Phil was rarely home. When he was a hurricane of rage. He told her to her face that he didn't love her. He told her she was a burden. There were nights when Kay would hide in the bathroom with their toddlers, listening to glass breaking in the living room, praying that he would pass out before he found them. It was a life of terror. It was during this dark period, specifically around 1974, that Phil sought comfort in the arms of another woman. He was working at a bar, living reckless and free. The affair was brief. To Phil, in his drunken haze, it was just another night, another sin in a sea of sins. He didn't know that the woman had become pregnant. He didn't know that while Kay was at home struggling to feed their boys on meager savings, another woman was giving birth to his child in a hospital not far away. Phyllis, the mother, never told Phil. She raised Phyllis on her own or with other partners. Phil moved on. The memory of that affair faded into the fog of alcohol. For 40 years, Phyllis grew up not knowing who her father was. She felt a gap in her identity, a missing piece of the puzzle. And Phil grew up not knowing she existed. He didn't know that he had left a piece of himself behind in the wreckage of his past life. It was a time bomb, ticking silently beneath the foundation of the empire he was about to build. The Miracle and the Empire. The story of Phil Robertson usually jumps from drunk to millionaire, but the bridge between those 2 points is where the real character is revealed. By 1975, Phil was at rock bottom. He had kicked Kay and the boys out. He was alone in a trailer, miserable, angry, and empty. A preacher named Rick tried to talk to him. Phil kicked him out, but the preacher came back. And eventually, broken by his own choices, Phil listened. He walked into a river, not to hunt ducks, but to wash away his sins. He was baptized. When he came out of the water, witnesses say his eyes looked different. The rage was gone. He went to Kay's workplace. He fell to his knees in front of everyone and begged her to take him back. Now, pause and think about Kay Robertson. Most women would have served him divorce papers. Most women would have said, "You hurt me too much." But Kay is the steel spine of the Robertson family. She looked at this broken man, and she saw the father of her children. She forgave him. She took him back. It was an act of radical grace that laid the groundwork for everything that followed. Phil channeled his obsessive energy into something else. Duck calls. He wasn't satisfied with the calls on the market. He wanted something that sounded like a real duck, not a toy. He sat at his kitchen table, carving cedar wood by hand. He invented the Duck Commander. It wasn't an overnight success. For years, the Robertsons were dirt poor. Phil drove his beat-up truck across Louisiana and Arkansas, stopping at every Walmart and bait shop, trying to sell his calls. Kay managed the books. The boys, Alan, Jace, Willie, and Jep, sat on the living room floor, assembling the calls by hand. It was a family business in the truest, grittiest sense. Slowly, the business grew. The calls worked. Hunters loved them. And then in 2012, the world discovered them. Duck Dynasty premiered on A&E, and it became a cultural nuclear explosion. 11 million viewers tuned in to watch these bearded, camouflage-wearing men who prayed at the end of every episode. They became the face of the American dream. Faith, family, and ducks. The merchandise was everywhere. The books were bestsellers. The Robertsons became worth hundreds of millions. But even as they counted their blessings, Phil knew he had a past. He knew that before Jesus, he had been a different man. He often preached about how God had forgiven his past sins. He didn't realize that one of those sins was a living, breathing woman who was currently searching for her father. The DNA test, the revelation. The bomb dropped in 2020. Phyllis, now a grown woman with children of her own, decided to take a commercial DNA test. She wasn't looking for money. She wasn't looking for fame. She just wanted to know where she came from. When the results came back, the algorithm flagged a match. A first cousin. The cousin was connected to the Robertson family. Phyllis did her research. She realized the timeline matched. She realized the location matched. She wrote a letter, but she didn't send it to Phil. She was too afraid of rejecting him or being rejected by him. She sent it to Al Robertson, Phil's eldest son. Al is the pastor of the family. He is the beardless brother, the calm voice of reason. Imagine receiving that letter. Al read the details. He looked at the DNA evidence. It was a 99.9% match. He realized, with a jolt of shock, that he had a sister. Al knew he had to tell his father. This was a dangerous moment. Phil was 74 years old. He was an icon of Christian values. This news could have destroyed everything. It could have humiliated Kay. It could have been a PR nightmare. Christian patriarch has secret love child. Many famous men in this position would have called their lawyers. They would have offered Phyllis a settlement to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, and disappear. They would have buried the secret to protect the brand. Al walked into Phil's house. He sat his father down. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about the past." He laid out the evidence. Phil listened. He didn't get angry. He didn't deny it. He thought back to those dark days in the 70s. The drinking, the women he didn't remember. He looked at Al and asked, "Is it true?" Al said, "The DNA says it is." Phil sat in silence for a long time, and then he said words that defined his character. "Well, bring her here. I want to meet my daughter." He owned it. "I was a wild man in those days," he admitted. "I have sins I don't even remember, but I'm not going to run from them now." The meeting was set. Phyllis flew to Louisiana. She walked into the church where Phil was preaching. When Phil saw her, he didn't see a mistake. He didn't see a scandal. He saw a daughter. He hugged her. The boys hugged her. They welcomed her into the fold immediately. But the most important reaction, the one everyone was terrified of, was Kay's. This was the woman who had been cheated on. Phyllis was a living, breathing proof of Phil's infidelity. She was a physical manifestation of the worst years of Kay's life. When Kay met Phyllis, the room went quiet. Kay looked at her. She saw Phil's eyes in her face. And then Kay smiled. She opened her arms. "I always wanted a daughter," she said. She hugged Phyllis like she was her own. It was an act of grace that silenced every critic. It proved that Kay's forgiveness wasn't just words. It was real. The final decline, Alzheimer's. Phyllis became part of the family. She was there for Thanksgiving. She was there for Christmas. She was in the family photos. It was a happy ending, a redemption story. But time waits for no man, not even the Duck Commander. In late 2024, the family announced the heartbreaking news. Phil had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. For a man who prided himself on his sharp mind, his debating skills, and his ability to quote entire chapters of the Bible from memory, this was the cruelest blow. The decline was faster than anyone expected. In the early months of 2025, it was small things, forgetting where he put his Bible, repeating stories about the old days, but soon the fog thickened. He would forget where he was. He would look at his sons and struggle to place their names. He would ask where his parents were, forgetting they had died decades ago. But there were two things he never forgot. He never forgot Jesus. Even when he couldn't recognize faces, he could still pray. The rhythm of prayer was wired into his soul. And he never forgot Kay. She became his anchor. As his world dissolved into confusion, she was the only solid ground. She cared for him with the same tenderness she showed when he was a drunk 50 years ago. She fed him. She dressed him. She sat with him on the porch, watching the river flow, holding his hand when he got scared. By April 2025, it was clear the end was near. His son, Jace, admitted on their podcast, unashamed. "He's not good. We're just making him comfortable. The lion is tired." Phil had always said, "Don't cry when I die. I'm going to a better place. Dance, sing, eat good food." But as his family gathered around his bed in May, listening to his shallow breathing, the tears were impossible to stop. They weren't crying for him. They were crying for themselves. They were losing the compass of their lives. On May 25th, 2025, Phil Robertson passed away peacefully at home. He was 79. The funeral was private. No cameras, no Hollywood executives, just the people who loved him. They buried him in a simple pine box on the land he loved. The reading of the will. But the story didn't end at the grave. The real emotional climax happened the next day in the lawyer's office. The reading of the will. The estate was worth an estimated $400 million. Duck Commander, the TV royalties, the books, the land, the investments. Phil had prepared handwritten letters for everyone. He didn't use legal jargon. He used his own voice. He left the business control to Willie and Jace, charging them to guard the tradition and keep preaching the gospel. He left the estate and the home to Kay, the woman who had built it brick by brick alongside him. He called her my Miss Kay in the letter, thanking her for saving his life. But then the lawyer picked up a separate envelope. It was marked with a name that wasn't there 5 years ago. Phyllis. The room held its breath. Phyllis had only been in his life for a short time. She hadn't helped build the company. She hadn't suffered through the poverty. Did he include her? Or was she just an emotional addition, not a financial one? The answer was yes. Phil left Phyllis a share of his personal assets. He treated her as an equal child. But more importantly, he left her a letter. In it, he apologized for not being there for her childhood. He told her that finding her was one of the greatest blessings of his final years. He acknowledged her as a Robertson, fully and completely. "You are my daughter," he wrote, "and I am proud of you." When the letter was read, Phyllis wept. It wasn't about the money. She didn't need the money. It was about the validation. The father she had searched for her whole life hadn't just accepted her in private. He had claimed her in his final legal act. He made sure that the world knew she belonged. Even in death, Phil was making things right. He didn't hide his mistake. He paid for it, and he redeemed it. The legacy of grace. Phil Robertson's life was not a straight line. It was a crooked path full of potholes, wrong turns, and dark valleys. He was a sinner before he was a saint. He was a failure before he was a success. He was a monster before he was a patriarch. But that is what made him real. He left behind a fortune. Yes, but his real legacy isn't the money. It isn't the duck calls. It isn't the TV show ratings. It is the family he stitched back together. It is the wife who forgave him when he was unlovable. It is the sons who respected him despite his flaws. And it is the daughter who found him just in time to say, "I love you." His story teaches us that it is never too late to fix a mistake. It teaches us that DNA doesn't make a family. Love does. And it teaches us that even the toughest men need grace. Phil Robertson is gone. The swamps of Louisiana are a little quieter tonight. The ducks are a little safer. But his family is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever. And somewhere, we can imagine Phil sitting by a river in the next life, finally at peace, knowing he left nothing unsaid. What do you think? Would you have been able to forgive like Miss Kay did? And do you think Phil did the right thing by including his secret daughter in the will? Let us know in the comments below. Rest in peace, Phil. You fought the good fight. This is the Seventh Lens. Thank you for watching.